So after posting a recent picture of a book I blind stamped on Reddit, a number of people were asking if I might be able to give a tutorial on pattern design for stamping for bookbinding. And so here we go. I've made a sort of personal self-study. This is a great book, 12 Centuries of Bookbinding by Paul Needham. And I've made a study of how these different books, the patterns that they were designed with. And so kind of after looking at, let me put this more center, after looking at some of these, making a study, this is really, I think, kind of an epitome of a beautiful medieval style. This is a Nuremberg binding, and kind of looking at the different features that each of these have in common and have different, and then kind of taking time. I've thrown away most of the scraps, but taking time to try and like draw them out and figure out like, okay, what goes where, and these are just a tiny fraction of the ones I've drawn. But yeah, you know, I learned once that the way they used to teach poetry was you just hand wrote out famous poems to get a feel for the words. And so that's my study of pattern design, is just replicate ones you see and kind of learn from stuff as you go. So I've also, I've read a number of books on pattern design in the abstract from the Victorian era, William Morris, and the elements of ornamentation or something like that, I forget. Anyways, here's some of the basics of what I've learned. So first you have to know the size of your book. I like to work on dotted paper. It's not quite as in your face as squared cubed paper. I have some of that. Let's see here. Yeah, so I will sometimes use graph paper, if that's all you can find, that works too. But the first thing you do, of course, is take the measurements of your book. So I would measure the book that I have. I don't actually have one in front of you with me, but then I would measure that out. It's not even a ruler I use. I would measure that out onto here. So let's say we're going to be stamping a book that is 6 inches by 9 inches. So I'm going to draw in, I didn't even leave myself enough space. Let's say it's 6 inches by 8 inches. There we go. The nice thing about the dots or the squares, whichever you do, is that it means you can kind of more easily line up things equidistantly. Okay, so let's say that's the outer size of your cover. One of the first things I've noticed about all beautifully stamped books is they do stamp in an outer border. So the way I design patterns is with pencil and paper. I kind of give a rough sketch of what I'm going to do. And then sometimes I'll go straight from there to the actual book, or sometimes do a more fine version, but I'll show you how I do that. So you'll want, the first thing I tool on any book is the outermost frame, just like 1/8 of an inch. And by the way, drawing straight lines is always easier if you push away from you, as I'm doing here. It's like 1/8 of an inch from the perimeter. This just gives a definite sense of the framing of the stamping. Now what I'm going to be teaching here is sort of classic 15th, 16th century stamping patterns, which then go under all various kinds of permutations as the centuries go along. But the basic idea is an initial division into 9 panels. So I'm going to count 4 squares and change. I'm going to stamp a line there. 4 squares and change. So with 4 lines, you just set in like this. Change. With 4 lines, you create 9 panels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now you could just divide these with single lines, but in all the most beautiful bindings, there are at least double, if not triple lines. So I'll just go ahead and put that in while I'm doing it. Sorry for that printer noise in the background, by the way. So there's double lines. And now double lines you can make with your single palette, just going over it twice. 1, 2. wheels I found way too unwieldy. I bought one, tried to figure out how to use it, and they're just not my jam. I think pallets are much easier, or fillets. I can never remember which is called which, but the one I showed you first there is definitely easier to work with. They make double and triple line pallets, and I have some, but honestly, I actually prefer to use a single line pallet and just do it twice. It's very hard to hold it exactly vertical and get an even impression for both lines with a double line pallet or fillet. Okay, so having divided into 9 panel, you then do a second interior level of division inside this inner box. So I'm going to actually, you could make a slightly smaller distance or the same. I'm going to make it the same. Actually, I'm make it slightly smaller. So here I'm going to do, and again, this is just your like rough sketch. So these lines, you notice I'm not even using a ruler, partly because you can follow the dots, but partly because this is just a rough sketch. So when you look at a lot of classic blind stamp bindings from the late Middle Ages, early Renaissance, so many of them utilize this sort of like 9 panel inside a 9 panel structure. So then we're going to think about putting stamps down, and for stamps, there's really kind of 3 different things you can do. You can buy regular leather working stamps and just hammer it into a piece of dowel. These are the cheapest but work the least well, because steel heats up so strangely. It's never quite the right temperature. It's either too cold or too hot. Brass is what you want. A number of sellers on eBay are selling these brass stamps that are attached to a steel rod. This is sort of the only fractionally more expensive than these and work way better, so I highly recommend. Or of course you could look for antique bookbinding tools on eBay or any place and use those instead. So you want to have at least 3 different tools of different patterns, and then have some sense of like how much space they take up. So this one is framed within a square, so I know I've got this one, and then you could even actually, one of the ways that you can have practice stamping, this makes a little bit of mess, but it can be worth it in the early stages, is if you take an ink pad, you can actually stamp you can put ink on your stamp, and then if you put a little bit of leather underneath your paper to like kind of allow it to impress through, you can leave yourself a stamp and kind of see what it looks like. There we go. So that's the impression that this stamp leaves. I also get an exact sense of its size. Okay, I'm gonna clean that off. Just by cleaning off, just wiping it on some old suede. So you could make stamps for your stamps, and you know, roughly, so this is a fleur-de-lis, which I'm going to just sort of reference with like a drawing like that. And then this is like a floriated cross vine thing, which is larger. I actually used this on my binding. So I'm going to kind of represent each of these symbols, each of these stamps, by a sort of just a little simplified pencil sketch. For this, I'm actually going to just do a little box with a cross on it. So that's what I had. One of the things you notice in medieval pattern design is they love alternating. So never repeating the same stamp over and over. Well, sometimes they do that too, but the best of them alternate A, B, A, B, A, B, or sometimes A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C. Or sometimes a mirrored thing. If you have one in the middle, you might have A, A, and then B, B, sort of mirrored off of a center. Those are 3 different patterns that you could utilize. So then you're laying out your patterns. So I'm going to put the fleur-de-lis in the corner, and you could do these all vertical. Oh, gotta get rid of my piece of leather. But I think it's kind of nice when the ones in the corner flare kind of symmetrically outward. So I'm just indicating to myself that this is where my fleur-de-lis is going to be as I'm building up my pattern. And then that nice 9 cube one, maybe I'm going to put that inside this square here. So yeah, I'm just kind of roughing this in to give myself a sense of where I'm going to put stuff. And then here, let's say I want to vary the 2 different squares I have. So usually squares are prettier when put in a diamond pattern. So I'm going to do the small one and the big one in these sort of alternating ways. There's always a bit of a gamble as to how many you're going to be able to get even numbered or not. If you really wanted you could space it out ahead of time and make it all precise, but one of the things that I'm certain of after studying all these bookbindings is bookbinders of old were never that precise. They really enjoyed, in the words of one bookbinder, just doing jazz, just putting it out there on the page. So there you go, got that. And then a really important tool to have is some sort of small circle stamping thing, because this just fills negative space really nice. So when you have negative space here on the other side of these, maybe I'm going to put little dots in between all the other tools that go here. And sometimes when I'm doing a drawing, I might not even put this in with my pencil, because I know that I'm obviously going to do that symmetrically. I'm going to do those over here as well. So I'm just kind of cueing myself in for that. When it comes to like a center panel, what I might do here is that sort of center, then symmetry on either side. So maybe I'll do one of these diagonal ones. And again, if you've got lots of tools, you can do all kinds of stuff. And then maybe I'll put fleur-de-lis here, sort of going out from it. And then maybe the box there, so the little one, so something like that. And then I'm going to duplicate that on the bottom for symmetry. So fleur-de-lis, little floriated cross box thing. So you can see it's really starting to take shape. If you have any letters, these are some of the hardest things to acquire in a bookbinder's repertoire, but acquiring some stamping letters can be really helpful. I got my first set from Brasseleur on Etsy. A guy in Turkey. It's a really good deal. You get all these letters. Let me show you. And you get a holder. I think you're gonna be putting about $200 in it. That's still much cheaper than elsewhere. And then here's the holder, which I just hammered into a piece of wood. You're seeing a pattern. And then you could put those letters, and you can do letter stamping, and that really does make it for kind of the professional touch. Although a binding doesn't have to say on the front what's in it necessarily. But if you want to do letters, as I did on the one that I put on Reddit, you could do the letters here. Letters. You could do the author and the title, or however you want it up here. And then in the centerpieces will almost always have some sort of center, and then everything mirrored. So sticking with just this idea that you've shelled out for 3 tools. One of the things you can do is you could make like this is called a diaper pattern. You could take your little cross and make kind of like a new, utilizing some negative space by putting them all together. Kind of makes like a bigger single piece. And then maybe I want to put a fleur-de-lis off the top and then off the bottom. And then maybe I want to, one of the things you could do here is, let's see, if you have dots, you could do dots. You could do dots emanating from this corner too, kind of add some symmetry. You could, let me think here, maybe I'd want to do some dots, let's see, maybe from the corner, like a line of dots kind of coming in, something like that. So things that kind of intersect into the middle, just gathering your eye to the middle. And these could be left blank. Another thing you could do is if you wanted to shell out for a single expensive roll, something with a roll pattern, you could put that down here. And so what I'll do there, if I'm going to do that, is I just kind of go like this, indicating to myself that that's where I'm going to put down the roll. Rolls don't leave any variation, and that actually is kind of a loss. It's like the little micro oddities that really make, I think, stamping look beautiful. So let me pull out that printing. There we go. So there we go. That's how I do pattern design. Generally for like a 15th, 16th century style book. I would then take my book, and then with my bone folder, I would probably mark in on the front cover of the book. Let me see here. Let's present that. This is a good book. Let's pretend I was marking this here. I might mark in with just a very light impression the outer border that's going to be done, And I'm going to tool all my lines against a straight edge. First I'll do all my lines, and then I'll put my tools on the stove and do my tools, and I do letters at the end. Now stamping is a whole different process, that requires whole different videos, but I just wanted to give some instance of how I do pattern design. I hope you like this, and if you did, feel free to send me a little thank you by PayPal, notes in the comments.